He came to claim a mining town, hoping to dig out fortune from the dust and silence of its abandoned streets. But when the enormous widows stepped from the shadows and said, "Your seed belongs to us," it left only one question: had he inherited wealth, or a destiny bound to their desperate survival? The trail wound like a scar through the Badlands, dry wind carrying the taste of iron and dust. Calder Boone shifted in the saddle, his weary horse picking its way between jagged rocks. For 3 days he'd been chasing the promise of fortune papers in his satchel, declaring him heir to a mining town no man had spoken of in years. Folks back in the Territory Saloon had called it cursed ground, but Calder had smiled, thinking only of silver veins and empty houses ready to be claimed. When he crested the ridge, the town came into view. Gallows Vein. The name alone sounded like a warning, carved in old maps and whispered in dying men's stories. Below him lay a cluster of crooked shacks, leaning boardwalks, and the skeletal frame of a mine shaft that clawed at the sky. No smoke rose from chimneys, no voices drifted on the wind. Only silence, thick and heavy, broken now and then by the creak of a shutter or the distant groan of wood long abandoned. Calder rode down slowly, every hoofbeat echoing against the hollow buildings. His boots touched dirt in the main street, and he tied his horse outside what once had been a general store. Glassless windows stared at him like blind eyes. He walked the boardwalk, spurs clicking sharp in the stillness, and felt the weight of being the only living soul for miles. But then he heard its footsteps. Not light, not hurried. Heavy, measured, deliberate. Calder froze, hand brushing the worn handle of his Colt. The sound came from the church at the end of the street, its steeple half collapsed, door swinging on one hinge. A shadow moved behind the warped glass. "Who's there?" Calder's voice carried, rough from trail dust. The door creaked wider. Out stepped a figure, a woman, taller than any he had ever seen. Shoulders broad beneath black mourning cloth, hair streaked silver though her face bore only middle years. Her eyes fixed on him with something between sorrow and hunger. Then another emerged, and another. From the church and from the houses flanking the street, they came. Women draped in dark gowns, their height uncanny, their presence overwhelming. Each bore the hard lines of lives, carved by grief and work. Some held lanterns, though the sun was still up, the glow casting their faces in an otherworldly pallor. Calder's mouth dried as he counted them 6, then 10, then more, until the street was lined with these towering widows, silent save for the whisper of skirts against dust. "You've come at last," one said, her voice low but carrying, as though the air itself bent to it. Calder steadied himself, forcing a smirk though unease coiled in his gut. "Name's Calder Boone. This town's mine now, by deed and by law." The women exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the eldest stepped forward. Her shadow fell across him like a storm. "No," she said, her voice edged with finality. "This town is ours, and now, so are you." Her words hung in the air like the toll of a funeral bell. "Before we go further, tell me, what would you have done in Calder's boots? Leave your answer in the comments below." The air felt thicker as Calder Boone faced them. The women stood like a wall across the street, their dark gowns swaying in the dry breeze. They were not the fragile widows he'd known in other towns, no bowed spines or trembling hands. These women loomed with a strength that unsettled him, as though years of grief had forged them into iron. The eldest, the one who had spoken, drew closer. Her black veil fluttered back, revealing eyes sharp as flint. Calder realized she was nearly a head taller than him, her shoulders broad enough to shame most ranch hands. Behind her, the others formed a line, each as formidable as the last, their faces hard but not without sorrow. "You claim this place," the matriarch said, her tone measured, "but Gallows Vein is not empty. We have tended it since the day the earth swallowed our husbands." Her words rippled through the crowd, the widows lowering their heads in a silent ritual of grief. Calder shifted, dust crunching under his boots. "I've got papers signed and sealed. Says plain as day this land belongs to me now. Whatever claims you had died with the mine." At that, a younger widow stepped forward. She was broad-shouldered, her dark braid reaching nearly to her waist. In her hands she clutched a rusted pickaxe like a staff. "You misunderstand, stranger. The mine took our men, but it did not take our duty. We remain. We endure." The others murmured their agreement, voices low and resonant, blending into something that sounded more like chant than speech. Calder felt his pulse quicken. He had stared down outlaws, card sharps, and crooked sheriffs in his time, but never had he felt such an uncanny weight pressing in on him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his hand still resting on his Colt, though he knew bullets might not buy him safety here. The matriarch's eyes bore into him. "You were sent, whether by law or fate. By coming, you have accepted more than deeds and titles. You carry the burden our men left unfinished." Calder swallowed, forcing a chuckle. "I came here for silver, not sermons." Another widow, her face hollowed but her body towering, stepped out from the line. Her voice was cold and certain. "Silver bought blood. The mine is not just earth, it is hunger. To still do it, there must be continuity. That is why you were called." Their words tangled in his mind, too heavy with meaning to ignore. "Continuance?" he repeated, his voice hard but wary. The widows exchanged glances again, and together, as if bound by one will, they answered, "Your seed belongs to us." The phrase struck him like a hammer blow. Calder's breath caught. He scanned their faces, searching for jest, but saw none. Each woman's eyes burned with conviction, as though they were bound by an oath older than the town itself. His instinct screamed to mount his horse and ride until the town was a memory. Yet something deeper rooted him to the dust. The claim of ownership in their voices was not simple greed, it was desperation wrapped in ritual. Before Calder could speak, the matriarch lifted her hand. The others fell silent. Her voice carried like a funeral bell across the hollow street. "You are not master here. You are the answer." Calder Boone had faced gamblers who swore their knives were quicker than his draw, and sheriffs who tried to rope him into debts he never owed. But never had he faced a street lined with women who looked at him as though he weren't flesh and blood, but some decree from heaven or hell made manifest. The eldest widow stood firm, her black veil lifted to reveal eyes that had seen too much. "You think papers matter here?" she asked, voice ringing against the abandoned walls. "Laws written by men with ink and coin? Those are for towns still living. Gallows Vein obeys older laws." Calder straightened, his hand still near the grip of his Colt. "I ain't much for ghost stories. If you've got a quarrel, speak it plain. What claim do you have over me?" The women shifted as one, their towering forms moving like shadows under the failing light. The younger widow with the rusted pickaxe spoke again, her tone solemn. The men went below. The earth took them. Before it closed, they swore an oath. Their bloodlines would not end here. Any man who came after, any who inherited the claim, would continue it. Calder frowned, his stomach turning cold. "Superstition. You can't bind a man to promises he never made." The matriarch, Seraphine Vale, raised her hand. Silence fell so heavy that even the wind seemed to die. "It is not a superstition. It is a covenant. We carved it into stone, buried with them. The mine remembers. The town remembers. And now, by setting foot here with deed in hand, you are bound." Calder's temper flared hot against the unease clawing at his chest. "Bound to what? To you?" A murmur ran through the line of widows, like a hymn carried on one breath. "To us," they answered together. Their voices overlapped, deep and resonant, enough to make the ground feel unsteady beneath his boots. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss them as grief-stricken women driven mad by solitude, but something in their bearing made the jest die on his lips. These were not broken figures clinging to delusion. Their grief had become law, their unity a fortress stronger than iron. "You expect me to honor words spoken by dead men?" he asked, his voice softer now, edged with reluctant respect. Seraphine Vale's expression did not waver. "Not expected. Demand. You bear the deed and with it the debt. You can walk away from gold, from houses, from titles, but not from the covenant, not from us." The others lowered their heads once more, the motion slow, deliberate, reverent. Calder felt the prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He could hear his horse shifting nervously down the street, hooves scuffing the dirt, as if the animal too sensed the gravity of the moment. "Old laws or no," Calder said, his jaw tight, "I'm my own man, and I'll decide what's mine." Seraphine Vale's gaze pierced him, unyielding. "Then decide quickly, for the mind does not wait, and neither do we." Her words carried a weight that settled over him like a shroud. Calder Boone had come to Gallows Vein chasing silver. Instead, he had inherited a covenant written in grief, older than the town itself, and it had claimed him before he even understood the price. The sun sagged lower, turning the ruined town red as blood. Calder Boone stood in the street, his chest tight, every instinct urging him to mount up and ride until the horizon swallowed this cursed place. But the widows blocked every path, their towering forms unmovable. The matriarch, Seraphine Vale, lifted her hand, and with that single gesture, the others parted to form a path not toward freedom, but toward the gaping mouth of the mine. "Come," she said. "If you wish to claim, you must see." Calder's jaw clenched. He thought of turning heel, thought of drawing his Colt and daring them to test his resolve. Yet their silence, their certainty, unsettled him more than any threat could. He followed, boots crunching on the gravel as they led him past sagging buildings toward the shaft. The mine rose ahead like a dead beast, its wooden beams splintered and half collapsed. A broken pulley hung above the entrance, rope swaying as if tugged by unseen hands. The air grew colder the nearer they came, carrying with it a stench of damp earth and iron. Calder paused, the hair on his arms bristling. "This is where it happened," said one widow, her voice trembling but resolute. She was younger, perhaps no more than 30, but her eyes carried the weight of decades. "Our husbands dug too deep. They found silver, yes, but they found something else." Seraphine Vale took a lantern from another widow's hand and stepped closer to the sealed shaft. The boards nailed across the entrance bore strange carvings, jagged symbols that Calder couldn't decipher. He brushed his fingers over one. It was sharp, cut deep into the wood as if the carver wanted the mark to last longer than the timber itself. "What's this?" Calder asked. "Wards," Seraphine said. "Marks to bind what lies beneath. They swore never to open it again, but oaths made to the earth demand payment. When the mine closed, it did not simply take their bodies, it took them whole and left us." Calder let out a sharp laugh, though unease clawed at his throat. "You telling me dirt killed him? Ground falls in, men die, simple as that?" Seraphine's eyes burned in the lantern light. "You think this is a collapse? Then listen." She pressed her ear against the boards. At first, Calder heard nothing but the restless wind. Then faint, far below came a sound that made his blood chill. A low groan, not of earth shifting, but of something alive. It rose and fell, like voices calling in sorrow. Calder staggered back. "That's the trick of the wind." The widows shook their heads in unison. "No trick," Seraphine said. "Our men's cries linger still, bound to the hunger of the earth. That is the curse of Gallows Vein." The lantern flames sputtered, throwing shadows tall and wild across the ground. Calder looked at the sealed shaft and felt a heaviness settle into his bones. For the first time since riding into town, he realized he hadn't inherited silver. He'd inherited doom. The sound of the earth's groaning followed Calder Boone back down the slope, haunting him long after the widows turned away from the boarded mine. He forced himself not to glance over his shoulder, though every instinct screamed that something beneath those timbers was listening. They gathered in the shell of the old church, the rotting steeple leaning like a broken finger toward the sky. Candles burned along the pews, their flames casting wavering shadows across the widow's tall forms. Calder sat stiff-backed near the altar, his hat clutched in his hands, watching the women circle him as if he were both guest and prisoner. Seraphine Vale, their matriarch, stood at the pulpit. Her voice was low and solemn. When the mine swallowed our men, it did not end their labor. The covenant demanded continuance. The land must not lie barren, nor the bloodlines fail. So it was written, so it must be kept. Calder's lip curled. I came here to stake my claim, not to be sermonized about seed and silver. You can keep your candles and your old words. At that, a ripple ran through the widows, a sound not unlike a hymn, low and resonant. One by one, they laid their hands upon their chests, eyes closed in a gesture that seemed more oath than prayer. You misunderstand, Seraphine said, her gaze fixed on him. The covenant is not ours alone. It binds every man who inherits this ground. You cannot choose it. By stepping here, you already answered. Calder rose sharply, his spurs striking the floor. I don't answer to the dead. Whatever bargains your men made, I'm no part of it. From the side, the widow with the rusted pickaxe stepped forward, her dark braid swinging. Her eyes burned with something fierce desperation disguised as duty. Without continuity, the earth hangs louder. Without seed, the curse deepens. Do you not hear it already? Do you think your nights will be free of its groaning? Calder's breath caught. He remembered the voices in the mine, that mournful wail carried up through stone. He shoved the thought away. You're mad with grief. That's all this is. Seraphine descended the pulpit, her black skirts whispering over the warped boards. She stopped before him, close enough that her shadow swallowed him whole. Grief we have borne, yes, but madness, number, we endure because we obey. And now, you will. Her hand, strong as iron, closed around his wrist. Calder tried to pull free, but her grip did not yield. The others drew nearer, their dark eyes gleaming in the candlelight, voices rising in a low chant. Continuance, they intoned. Continuance, or death. The sound filled the church, vibrating in the rafters. Calder's pulse thundered in his ears. He'd faced outlaws with rifles leveled at his chest, but never this, a ritual that seemed older than the town itself, carried on the voices of women who looked more like judges than widows. He yanked his arm free at last, breath ragged. You'll not chain me to your grief, he spat. I'll ride before dawn. Seraphine's lips curved in a sorrowful smile. Try, and the earth itself will claim you. There is no leaving Gallows Vein without paying its price. The chant swelled, echoing through the hollow church until Calder felt it in his bones, and in that moment he realized he wasn't trapped by the widows alone, he was trapped by the land. Night draped Gallows Vein in silence. The church stood dark now, its candles snuffed, its widows vanished into their looming houses. Calder Boone waited in the shadows of the general store, hat pulled low, his colt heavy at his hip. He'd spent the last hours pacing the length of his thoughts until a single truth settled hard in his chest. If he stayed, the widows would swallow him, whole body, will, and name. The horse nickered softly where he'd tied it earlier, restless in the wind. Calder laid a calming hand on its neck. Easy, boy, we're riding out, come dawn or devil. The moon cast long bars of silver over the crooked street. Calder led the horse slow, boots making no sound on the dry dirt. The town felt like a graveyard, windows dark, doors shut tight. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes followed him with every step. He mounted, shifting into the saddle, heart pounding. The open trail was just a gallop away. He spurred the horse forward, but before the first stride carried him clear, a shape moved across the street. One of them, a widow, taller than any man, stepped into the moonlight, her black dress billowing. Her eyes caught the pale glow unblinking. Calder swore under his breath and jerked the reins, turning toward the side alley. The horse clattered down the narrow way, hooves sparking on stones. Another shadow rose at the far end, then another. The alley closed with towering silhouettes. They had known. Calder wheeled the horse back toward the street, but the widows were already gathering, silent and steady. Their skirts swept the dust as they moved without hurry, as if certain he would not escape. Fear knotted his gut. He pressed heels to flank, and the horse bolted toward the outskirts. For a heartbeat he thought he'd made it. The open land stretched ahead, pale and empty. Then the ground shifted beneath him. A low groan, deep as thunder, rolled from the earth. The horse reared, screaming, eyes wide. The ground trembled, pebbles rattling in the dust. Calder clung to the saddle, staring toward the hills. The sound was coming from the mine, even sealed as it was. The voices he'd heard earlier seemed louder now, rising like a dirge. The widows closed in, circling him where he fought to steady his mount. One called out, her voice sharp as a bell, "The earth forbids your leaving." Calder spat into the dust, anger overtaking fear. "I answer to no dirt, nor to you." But the horse shivered beneath him, refusing to move forward. The air stank of sulfur and iron, heavy as breath on his neck. Calder turned in desperation, and for a flicker of an instant he saw it movement behind the boarded mine. Something is shifting, something alive. The widow's chant began again, low and unbroken. Continuance, continuance. Calder's hand tightened on his Colt, but no bullet would silence the earth. He realized then that escape was not denied by women alone. The land itself had claimed him. The widows left him for the night, their chants fading as they melted back into their houses. Calder Boone sat by the church steps until the tremor in the earth stilled and his horse's shivering eased. Sleep did not come, only the restless thought that whatever clawed beneath Gallows' vein would not let him leave. At dawn, determined to learn more, Calder made for the old assay office on the edge of town. Its door hung crooked, its sign faded, but inside, dust lay thick across papers and crates. He rifled through ledgers, scattering yellowed pages across the desk until his hand brushed a leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of brittle maps. The cover bore a name etched deep: Silas Vale, the husband of Seraphine. Calder opened it. The ink faded but legible. The entries began with optimism, notes on rich seams of silver, the excitement of men who believed themselves destined for fortune. But as the days passed, the handwriting grew jagged. The 3rd of August. The silver vein runs deeper than we thought. Strange markings in the rock. Some say they look like bones. The 9th of August. The men hear voices. At first we thought it was wind, but the sound lingers even when all else is silent. The 12th of August. The earth is alive. It groans beneath us. I told the men to keep digging. We cannot stop now. But at night, I dream of mouths in the stone. Calder's pulse quickened. He turned the page with care. The 15th of August. 3 men never returned from the lowest shaft. We found their tools, but no bodies. The walls looked as though they had breathed. The journal ended abruptly. Ink smudged across the last line, as if Silas had dropped the pen mid-word. Calder shut the book, his hands clammy. He understood now why the widows spoke of covenant. Their men hadn't simply died in a collapse. They had awakened something, and in their final hours, carved an oath to keep it contained. From the rafters came a creak. Calder spun, Colt drawn, but only dust drifted in the light. He exhaled slowly, the journal heavy in his hand. Outside, the town lay quiet, yet he felt the eyes of the widows following him even when no figure showed. He strode to the mine's entrance again, pressing the journal against the carved wards. The symbols seemed to throb faintly under his palm, as though the book itself recognized the barrier. A voice broke the silence. "You've read his words." Calder turned. Seraphine Vale stood in the dust, her black veil lifted, her expression caught between sorrow and steel. "I have," Calder said. "And if what's written here is true, your men stirred something best left buried." Her gaze did not waver. "That is why the covenant binds you. Their blood is gone. Yours must take its place." Calder looked back at the mine, the boards rattling as though some great beast shifted just beyond. For the first time, he felt less like an intruder and more like the last defense in a battle that had never truly ended. The church bell, cracked and rusted, tolled once in the wind, though no rope pulled it. The sound carried across the hollow town as Seraphine Vale led Calder Boone into the open square. The other widows gathered in a wide circle, their tall forms swaying like blackened trees in a storm. Calder gripped the journal under his arm, jaw tight. He had read enough to know the curse was no tale spun from grief. Still, he bristled at being treated like a pawn in some ritual. Seraphine's veil fluttered as she turned to him. "You have seen what your inheritance carries. You have heard the mine groan. There is no denying it now." Calder's voice came rough. "What I saw were words scrawled by a man driven half-mad underground, and what I heard was wind through rotting boards." Her eyes flashed, sharp as struck flint. "You lie to yourself. The earth speaks, Boone. It speaks through hunger. If no man feeds it, it takes what it will." The circle of widows murmured, their voices blending like distant thunder. Calder glanced at them, unsettled. Each face bore the same look, unshakable certainty, hardened by years of loss. He stepped closer to Seraphine, lowering his voice. "If all this is true, then why me? Why not let your covenant die with your men? Why chain yourselves to it still?" Her expression softened, though sorrow sharpened every line. "Because to turn from it is to lose everything. This town, this land, even our lives. We are bound, and through us, so are you." She reached out, her hand brushing the journal. "You carry proof enough. Our men carved their promise into stone. Their oath became law. You inherited more than land, you inherited their vow." Calder's breath came heavy. He wanted to burn the book, to scatter the ashes and ride hard until the desert swallowed Gallows Vein. Yet when Seraphine looked at him, he saw not madness but a strange, aching hope. "What is it you want of me?" he asked. The circle grew still. Even the wind hushed. Seraphine's answer fell like a hammer. "Continuance. Your blood to mingle with ours. Your seed to carry what was lost. Only then does the earth rest. Only then does the hunger pause." Calder barked a laugh, harsh and incredulous. "You think I'll bed down because some stone says so? I'm no bull to be yoked." Her gaze did not falter. "You are heir. And heirs do not choose their duty, they bear it. You may fight it, but the mine will claim you all the same. Better you stand with us than be swallowed alone." The widow's chant began again, low and rhythmic. "Continuance, continuance." The sound pressed in, vibrating through Calder's chest until it felt as though his heart beat in time with theirs. He clenched his fists, fury warring with a grim awareness. The bargain lay clear before him: join them or be broken by the hunger beneath. The ground trembled before dawn, shaking Gallows Vein like a beast rousing from sleep. Calder Boone bolted upright in the cot he'd claimed inside the abandoned saloon, hand flying to his Colt. The boards beneath him groaned, dust falling in thin curtains from the rafters. Outside, a chorus of bells and shutters clattered as the widows poured into the street, their dark shapes stark against the pale sky. A sound rose with the tremor low at first, then swelling into a howl that made Calder's teeth ache. It came from the mine, from beneath the sealed timbers. The earth bellowed like a throat filled with fire. Seraphine Vale strode through the dust, her veil thrown back, lantern in hand, though the morning light had already broken. "The hunger stirs," she cried. "The wards weaken." Calder pulled on his boots and stalked into the street, jaw tight. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" She met his gaze without flinching. It always comes. That is why the covenant endures. Another tremor rocked the ground, and a plume of dust burst from the boarded shaft. The widows wailed as one, some clutching at their chests, others sinking to their knees. Calder's horse screamed and reared at the hitching post, eyes rolling white. Enough. Calder shoved through the circle, marching toward the mine. If this town's going to be swallowed, I'll see it with my own eyes. The widows followed, their black dresses whipping in the wind. When the mine came into view, Calder's breath caught. The heavy timbers nailed across the entrance had split. Smoke curled through the gaps, thick, acrid, glowing faintly as if lit from within. He yanked his bandana up over his mouth and stepped closer. The heat rolling out felt like the breath of a furnace. A board cracked with a sharp report, and a shower of sparks hissed into the dust. "Back!" shouted one widow, her voice shrill. "It will take you!" But Calder didn't move. He raised his Colt, fired twice into the weakened boards. The shots echoed like thunder, and the wood gave way, collapsing in a shower of ash and embers. Behind the breach, the shaft yawned open. A glow pulsed deep inside, steady and unnatural. Calder staggered back, heart hammering. He expected silver veins, maybe magma, but this was something else, a living light, throbbing like a heartbeat. The widows fell to their knees, chanting, "Continuance, continuance," their voices rising above the rumble. Calder turned, fury searing away fear. "Enough. You've knelt to this thing too long. If it wants blood, it won't have mine." The earth groaned louder, splitting stone around the shaft. A blast of heat threw dust high into the air, setting the sky aglow. Calder squared his shoulders, gun steady, though some part of him knew no bullet could harm what stirred. Still, his voice rang clear above the chaos. "If this land's cursed, then I'll damn well fight it on my feet." And for the first time since his arrival, the widows looked at him not as a prisoner, but as a man, standing in defiance of the hunger beneath. The mine roared like a furnace, spitting ash and heat into the sky. Calder Boone stood at its mouth, Colt drawn though it felt like a child's toy, against the thing that pulsed below. The widows huddled in a semicircle, their tall forms trembling, black skirts whipping in the firelit wind. Seraphine Vale stepped forward, the lantern raised high, the glow from the shaft reflected in her eyes like molten gold. "It stirs because the covenant was broken. Too long without continuance, too long without seed." Calder barked a laugh, harsh in the choking air. "You think this is about children? About heirs? Number, this is about fear. You've bent your knees to it so long you've forgotten how to stand." The ground shook again, nearly knocking him from his feet. Rock split along the shaft, revealing the glow deeper, brighter like veins of fire running through the stone. From below came a sound that was neither human nor holy earth, a chorus of voices crying in endless grief. The widows clutched their ears, but Calder forced himself forward. "Your men dug too deep, aye. But what they found wasn't a god. It wasn't a covenant. It was hunger, and hunger only grows if you feed it." He snatched the journal from his coat, thrusting it toward Seraphine. "These words ain't law. They're warning. Your men died trying to bind it. You've kept it alive with your oaths." The matriarch wavered, torn between faith and doubt. Behind her, the younger widow with the rusted pickaxe raised her voice. "If not continuance, then what? How do we silence it?" Calder looked back at the shaft, the firelight burning hotter, the groans swelling until it seemed the whole mountain keened. He holstered his Colt, drew a length of fuse, and the single stick of dynamite he'd found in the assay office. His hand shook, not from fear alone but from the weight of choice. "We bury it," he said. "Not with vows, not with blood, with stone." The widows gasped, some in horror, others in desperate hope. Seraphine's lips parted as though to protest, then closed. At last she nodded, slow and solemn. Together they set to work. Calder planted the charge at the fractured seam, his hands steady now. The widows gathered stones, piling them high, sealing the wound as best they could. Seraphine struck the match, passed it to Calder. He lit the fuse. Sparks hissed downward, trailing into the dark. Calder pulled the widows back, shielding them with his body as the earth roared. The blast shook the valley. Fire belched skyward, then smothered under a thunderous collapse. The shaft caved, stone grinding over stone, sealing the light beneath a tomb of its own making. Silence followed, thick and absolute. The widows wept, some with grief, some with relief. Seraphine looked to Calder, her eyes wet but fierce. You ended what our men began, not by seed, but by will. Calder tipped his hat, dust streaking his face. Then maybe it's time Gallows Vein stopped living in graves. For the first time since its founding, the town felt still, not cursed, not hungry, simply alive. And Calder Boone, who had come for silver, had inherited something greater, the right to stand unbroken against the darkness. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.